Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. Thank you so kindly for being here with us today. Today, we're honored to have Cheryl Contee. She's a chief executive officer at the Impact Seat Foundation, which is working to create a world in which women can succeed as business leaders. She's also the award-winning founder and chair of Do Big Things, a digital agency that creates new narrative and new technology, new tech for a new era focused on causes and campaigns. Cheryl is the Amazon best-selling author of Mechanical Bull, How You Can Achieve Startup Success. If I continue to read her bio, I wouldn't bore you, but that's all we would talk about, her bio. So let's just have her in the flesh talk about it. Cheryl, welcome to Politics Done Right. How are you doing today?
It's an honor to be with you, Egberto, and your audience.
Absolutely. It was great. It was great hearing all about you at Netroots. You had your panel that you did, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, first of all, tell us first, why did you go to Netroots? What was your purpose? What did you intend to get out of Netroots?
Well, I've been to every Netroots Nation since the first one, since before it was even called Netroots Nation. The first
what
one
was it called again in the old days?
Called Yearly Coast.
Yearly Coast, absolutely.
Right,
so.
right.
Yes.
And I know you're a Daily Coast contributor and editor, so I know you know all about that. So yeah, I've been a part of the progressive movement, for the last 20 years. I think this was our 17th or 18th year.
Yeah.
I am the board chair. I'm not sure how that happened, how I got chosen to do that, but
what do you mean you don't know how that happened? Come on, qualifications, man. Don't say that.
I suppose so. I suppose maybe the cream rises to the top or something like that. But, it's been really a privilege to be part of bringing the progressive movement together. As you know, it's a very diverse movement. There's often, a lot of infighting sometimes, some internal conflict. And I think, one of the things that Netroots Nation has been successful in doing is, trying to have that conflict or, that constructive dialogue be positive, right? As opposed to, and something that, builds on something rather than tears something apart. So, it's the largest progressive gathering of activists, influencers, creators like yourself, members of Congress, elected officials from all over the nation, candidates, media, you name it, nonprofit heads. It's a really, really rich, there's no one you're sitting next to who isn't a really interesting person. Mm-hmm. And this was our biggest year. Our biggest year was 2019, when we had over 3,000 people, I think maybe 3,500 people. I think we came pretty close to that this year. So we're back and getting as big as ever. That said, during the heart of COVID time, in 2020, we had every night, we were virtual. Every night for the keynote, we had 500,000 people tuning in. So, the movement is really out there, whether they're in person or not.
Well, I was going to talk to you a lot about what you're doing outside of Netroots. But again, as you started speaking about Netroots, it was like, well, let's put a little bit into this as well, because it is the largest progressive largest progressive conference in the country, bar none. And also, I think we get a better flavor than most. I participate in many other progressive groups, and it's the one where it at least tries to mimic or look like what America looks like. And I know that a lot of this has been intentional. It didn't happen by happenstance, because there's a lot of reasons why certain demographics can participate in 3 or 4 days that we spend out there, in whether it be Chicago. I think the next one is going to be in Baltimore. Yeah. So it's not easy, and it's expensive as well.
Yes, and that's something that early on, I think people flagged that. Look, it's problematic that we have a board, that isn't very diverse. It doesn't look like, the movement itself or America itself. The speakers, don't look, there's something the matter here, right? And what is it? And right, cost, was part of it. We have a really big scholarship program where sponsors help to bring, amazing, often younger activists who have, less in their pockets, but a lot in their hearts to Netroots Nation. We also really look hard at the applications. We get, tens of thousands of applications of, people looking to speak at Netroots Nation every year. It's a big job to go through them all. But one of the things, we started doing long ago was requiring that, your panel be diverse. You can't submit a panel that's all white people. You can't submit a panel that's all, dudes. Like we're not going to approve that. Like try harder, okay, to find a different perspective, because that diversity is what we have found is actually going to make that panel a lot richer and more interesting.
Yeah, well, and it's amazing how well it's done because as it turns out, right, we've been attending from the beginning and it looks a lot different than it used to look. Between you and me, sometimes I have even said, is that a little bit overboard?
Fair enough. But look, better, especially in these times, I think that Netroots Nation is providing a roadmap and some leadership, right? And yes, maybe you don't have to go as far, as we do, but, we're in part trying to be an example of what's really possible if you make the effort.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely so. I've been talking about this for years. In fact, I've written a couple of articles on Daily Kos where I mentioned, I don't remember if you remember what happened with BLM in Arizona, etc. I had quite a bit of stories that had to be written about the progressives in the room and the reactions and that sort of stuff. But ultimately speaking, we always work these scenarios out, which speaks well for what a progressive movement is supposed to be. Now, like I said before, I didn't want to concentrate on Netroots Nation because your story outside of this progressive organization that you chair is it's much more vast, and I think it's much more impactful on the things that you're actually working on. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your group, the Impact Seat Foundation? Tell me a little bit about that, and also I want to hear a little bit attentive.ly.
Sure. Well, I would say my work with the Impact Seat Foundation actually it's born out of the work with Attentively. So, my career for a very long time now has been at the crossroads of politics and technology, two super boring, like very slow.
Not for me, but for no, I'm a nerd.
I am being facetious. Yes, it's it is a crazy place to be at the center of, given that the rapid social and technical innovation, both of those spaces, have been experiencing, but exciting. It's never dull. So, one of my projects was creating a startup called Attentively. And Attentively was a platform, software as a service, that was about influencer engagement, social listening, and marketing automation. We were actually starting before we got acquired to look at AI, actually, and machine learning. So that was acquired in July 2016, and it is the first tech startup with a Black female founder on board to be acquired by a NASDAQ company, which is a big deal. It was an impact startup that was purchased and acquired by an impact corporation. Blackbot is one of the leading purveyors of nonprofit focused software around the world. So we were really excited about that. At the same time, because I was unique, in the startup world, there's been this gravitational pull to a certain extent from the world of, progressive politics and digital activism into a different form of activism on the side of entrepreneurship. A lot of your listeners may or may not know that Black women specifically are launching businesses in America at the highest rate of any demographic in America, including white men. And yet they are grotesquely undercapitalized, which hurts everyone. I mean, there's something like, $15 trillion of GDP that we would have if we actually invested in people of color, at the rate that they're starting businesses, at an equivalent rate to, white people.
Now, what do you see as the solution to that? Because I have some issues with who capitalizes companies. We have, for existence, the Black Bank that in Atlanta. I can't recall the name of it right now. That what it has is a black face, but it's really not a black bank. If you take a look at all the capitalization of the bank, et cetera, the guys who are the face of the bank doesn't have the power. Unlike you, who in the things that you are putting together, you make sure that your voice is the one that matters. So I mean, I always have a double take on capitalization. Do you think there are alternative methods than going into, let's say, some of these capital markets? Are there other sources that we can really have true independence that we can think of in the progressive space, but not only that, but with, people of color, et cetera?
Sure. I mean, some folks have found, foundation sponsorship, for their software products, or, like change.org. Ben Rattray, the founder, is an old friend of mine. And, he has found some really creative, innovative ways to, fund his company, including, from nonprofit sources. Is it possible to do a co-op? Sure. But, I think that, the world in which I've entered of venture capital is there's a nascent but fast growing movement of people who are saying, look, people of color need to become investors. Right? People of color need to be funded. Their startups need to be funded. And, the current market is not actually is not efficient. There's a market distortion happening called racism and sexism that, logically speaking, if Black women are launching most of the companies, they should be getting most of the investment. End of story. That's not what's happening.
You scare me. I'm sorry. You scare me completely, because did you get, or is your degree in business administration as taught in the colleges and universities in the United States?
It sure is. My degree from Yale my BA is ethics, politics, and economics. But I also worked at the help desk. I had to have a job. I was required at the time to have a job in addition to school by my scholarship. And I, learned a lot about technology. And so, that career at the crossroads of those two, initiatives happened even then.
Let me tell you why I'm asking you this, because there's a specific reason I'm asking you this, because you just encapsulated in one sentence you talk about market distortion, which is exactly true. We always talk about the free markets and all these great issues, but the market ain't all that free. If it supposedly it's supposed to navigate itself to where things are happening, but somehow you made the statement that Black women are the ones forming the most businesses right now, but somehow the capital isn't gravitating towards that. And in a true free market-based capitalist structure, one would imagine that the dollars would follow where the innovation is.
Right. And, I have this conversation with, tech bros here in Silicon Valley all the time where I say, look, if your argument is you are trying to make the most money and trying to get your shareholders the best return on investment, all of the studies show that diverse-led firms are more innovative, they are more productive, they are more profitable. When they exit, they tend to exit at higher multiples, and they are more capital efficient because they have to be. So if your argument is, I need to invest, right? These aren't concessionary investments. In fact, you're missing out on getting the highest return on investment because you're not investing in the right people.
I am glad you said that. These are not concessioners. You're not doing anybody any favors. You're doing exactly what the fiduciary responsibility of somebody governing a stock, a venture capital company is supposed to do. And the only drawback from that, as you stated there, is because you're not following the formula. You're bringing in other externalities to stop the progress, and racism being one of them, sexism being another.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's our argument is, look, yes, capitalism, isn't sufficient. And, almost every, Western country has some combination of capitalism, socialism, and democracy. How much of those, what ratio those exist varies from country to country, but everyone has, some combo of that, and I think right now there is a lot of tension in our country in saying, look, capitalism ain't that capital, is it? Only for some, and B, there's a lot of social needs that aren't being met, and then finally, democracy. Do we believe in it or not? Are we going to increase democracy in America? Are we going to let it prosper? Or are we going to go in a different direction and have a tyrant or a king? Is that what we really want? Because there are people who want a king, who explicitly want women to not vote and think that America needs to be a king. There are people on the far right who believe that.
Hey, Cheryl, I'm glad that we're having this conversation because I think the audience is going to get. I speak a lot about capitalism, socialism, and interaction thereof, and I think a lot of people need to hear your perspective on this. I think it's been very, very important. So tell me, what are your organizations going to be doing to make things better, to improve on this?
Sure. Well, I'm so lucky to have an amazing co-founder in Barbara Clark at the Impact Seat Foundation. Quietly, she is perhaps the one of the leading individual investors in women-led tech startups in America. So, I'm working with an economist, and businesswoman who has a lot of experience, a lot to share. So we're doing it through impact investing, through advocacy, and through grant making to folks who are supporting the notion that, capital needs to flow to the people who are actually building the businesses.
Now, what would you have liked me to ask you that I didn't?
Sure. Well, two things. I have another organization besides Netroots Nation and the Impact Seat Foundation. It's called Do Big Things. We're a digital agency that works with progressive causes and candidates. And, we're starting to get geared up for 2024. The race has already started. The debate was last night. And you didn't ask me if I watched it and what I thought about it.
Well, I tell you what. I'm going to ask. Here's the thing. I am so disappointed that I'm a naturalized American citizen. I came here with big eyes, thinking of great things about America, and for all practical purposes, it turned out to be that way. I did very well in America, been able to form companies, all that. It's been great, but to see where it has what it has degenerated into being now is a cause for concern. Why didn't I ask you about the Republican debate? Because to put it bluntly, it was embarrassing, but I'm going to ask you because you requested. What do you think about the Republican debate?
Sure. Well, I think it is an example of the things that you just mentioned, in that, there are exciting things that are happening in our country, and there are people who want to drag us backwards, who are very threatened by the idea of a multicultural, multi-gender, equitable nation. They want to preserve their privileges. And, there's a real conflict here. And that was visible last night in a bunch of candidates who spouted incredibly, like, deeply unpopular positions. I don't understand how, they plan to get elected. I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy, said things like, there are two genders. Fossil fuels are a requirement for human prosperity. Really? I don't know that that's true, actually. There are some European countries that are almost entirely powered by non fossil fuels. So and it's clear that those aren't the future. We're going to run out of oil eventually. I mean, that's why people want to do fracking and offshore drilling, is, because we're starting to run out of oil. It's also pretty dirty and expensive. So, it was very strange to hear, people so anti-abortion, even though the moderator said, look, this is a losing issue for us. Why are we doing it? And all of them, had these very extreme positions. So, there's a lot to be excited about the potential of where America can go and some of the things that are happening. And yet we have to, this is a time where we have to stand up, for, the notion that diversity is a good thing, that equity is a good thing, that inclusion is a good thing. What kind of person says that inclusion is wrong? Let's just take a step back and think about, really, you want to exclude people. That's your position.
On two sides of the equations, you're doing important work. One is the education side with Netroots, where it's educating the masses. And the other is where you're actually taking it from the back end, building businesses what makes the system. When it comes to what these guys believe, on as unpopular as they are, because we are not a real democracy, they still have a lot of weight. 2 senators per state, gerrymandering. There's so much undemocratic in this system that still gives, even if it's just a 40% group of folk that believe this kind of stuff, enough to win elections. And that's always going to be our concern.
Yeah, it is a real challenge. I mean, those students of American history will understand that, a bunch of rich white guys built the system that way. They built it because democracy was an experiment at the time, at least, in that era. And they were worried, how democratic should this be? Right? Do we need some, valves, some switches we can, toggle in case, democracy is not working out, right? And how do we weight power? Look, it wouldn't surprise me if in our lifetime, this particular experiment of, America starts to fall apart. There are states that want to do very, very different things and have, very different beliefs and structures. That said, Justin Jones of the Tennessee Three, I don't know if you met him.
I went to each one of I went to his panel and his keynote. Yeah.
Yeah, that dude has a future. Okay. He's one to watch. But one of the things that he has been stressing is, look, something like 60 to 70% of the seats in the state legislature of Tennessee have gone uncontested. Uncontested. So that's the Democratic Party's problem, right? Are they really serious about defending American democracy if they're just going to, not actually run candidates again in a place they would probably win at this point on the right, with the right message, right, on the right issues. So there's a lot of work to do. But
well, sure.
Go ahead.
I know I need to say this because you nailed it. The Democratic, I want to say this as kindly as I can. There is a certain middle ground here on both sides of the spectrum, on the right and the left, that loves the status quo. It's in the Republican Party and it's in the Democratic Party. And the reality is neither one wants too much democracy. because too much democracy will bring a sort of equity they're not willing to accept.
Yeah.
And the only ones that can push that out are, again, groups like what we do at Netroots and progressive groups that are ringing the bells all of the times. We are pretty much alone, but we have to get the job done and bring folks along. I always talk about if the masses really knew what we represented, there wouldn't be a contest. It would be landslides all over for the policies we support. We have to get better, in my opinion. And I think that's where you're doing a great job in leading Netroots. You're doing a great job in having these organizations. But you don't hear, this is the first time I've heard the majority of businesses are being created here, and somehow capital is not chasing it. You are capable of speaking on business term, capital terms, and on grassroots term, which is what we need. Cheryl, you're the author of a book that I think just about everybody needs to get. What's the name of the book again?
It's called Mechanical Bull: How You Can Achieve Startup Success, and it's comes out of my work not only with Attentively, a startup that I founded that had a successful exit, but I've actually been part of a number of other exits since then. So, look, as a successful entrepreneur, my company sold in July 2016. My son Colm was born in August 2016. And I like to joke that, I've got something like a 20-year runway and no exit strategy yet. So it's a joke that plays well here in Silicon Valley. Let's put it that way. But look, I was holding my 3-week-old baby, and a friend came over to visit, and she said, "Look, Cheryl, 17 Americans have been to the moon. No American has done what you have done. You are the first Black woman whose startup has been acquired by a NASDAQ company. You have an obligation to help open the door to others." And so that's why I wrote the book, and it has a little bit of my personal story, but it has a lot of quotes from friends of mine who are innovators. They are funders, they're investors, entrepreneurs. It follows the life cycle of a startup. A lot of people don't know that there's a life cycle. It's funny, I try to have a lot of jokes in there to, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, but there's a lot of practical information. If you are an aspiring entrepreneur, or you have a business and you want to grow it, you want it to scale, this is the book for you that's going to give you, all of the hard won insights of how to get through that I have to offer. And so do my friends.
And you can find the link for the book in the blog that's going to accompany this particular video. Earlier, I asked you, what would you have liked me to ask you that I didn't? And you came up with one. Is there anything else before we close this down?
No, it's such a privilege to get to talk to you. Your story, and your work is so inspirational. I know the folks who, choose to tune in, to your words and to your guests are pretty smart people, who care about what's going to happen in this country. And we all have a role to play, at this point. Every single American has a role to play in what the future is going to look like. And you're right. Most Americans, even conservatives, actually are on the same page of what needs to happen. And almost all of those are progressive standpoints. So, how do we get there, right? How do we actually come together as a nation, rather than, or, does the West Coast just become its own country?
Cheryl Contee, Chief Executive Officer at the Impact Seat Foundation, among other great jobs. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you for having me, Egberto.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.